Hello, this is the second part of our gem harvest discussion. If you're thinking second part, Dan, have not heard the first, then you're in luck, because that is also on this very channel. You just need to either click, it'll be in either the thumbnails on the side, or you'll just find it on the channel in general. It's the second to last video we posted. From the perspective, it might not be though. It might be buried deep. You might be listening to this in years' time when the nuclear apocalypse has happened. Dear, wow, how do I even start with that? That went deep and dark very quick, didn't it? So yeah, okay. I will link in the description. That's the simple answer, isn't it? Instead of me trying to vaguely describe it. Yeah, link in the description. So if you'd like to hear the first part of this discussion, link in the description. If you've already heard the first part and are here for the second and thinking, Dan, shut the hell up, you're also in luck, because I'm about to do that. Cue the music.
So let's talk about the. Do you agree with me that there are themes and ideas around like immigration and stuff?
Absolutely.
More, or...
And I think it was used more to characterize Andy than it was to actually make social commentary. Because they could have explored them as more as commentary, but then again, you're getting away from the point. I mean, essentially, if you're looking at this episode, it's Andy's story. It's about getting Andy on board with the gems and sort of doing the sort of that moment of revealing that they are a family and using an excuse to get them all together. And I think that's really neat, and I think that works really well. So I'm kind of on board with the way this is. That sort of plays out, because I just think that if you go any further, then you're taking the focus off Andy's development as a character. And also, I do feel a little bit like that stuff when he's saying it, I kind of get the impression it's just out of frustration and anger at the situation more than he actually believes some of that stuff. Because he does say some things that you could argue are sort of sexist or not racist as such, but sort of xenophobic, because get out of my country and all this stuff. Like, and I feel like they're just trying to. I think they're just trying to paint the picture of what that kind of anger leads to. And Nadia made a really good point, because I actually watched this one with Nadia. Very rarely do I watch an episode of this show with Nadia, because we usually record at weird times and I watch it separately.
Well, to clarify, you don't watch the reruns, or you don't watch the episodes you're watching for this with her, but you watch the live ones with her, don't you?
Absolutely, yeah. Sorry, we watch the show together when we watch the show when it's new episodes, but when I've been rewatching them for this podcast due to timing and stuff, when we're recording this podcast, it's usually because either she's not around or she's still at work or whatever, and that means I have to watch it on my own, which is fine. But I watched this one with her because we happen to be in the same room, and she loves the show. She'll always dip in and out when she can. So we watched it, and what she said was really funny is he's talking about how Aunt Deb went off in her van, Greg went off in his van, and that they're all hippies. And what I found really funny about that was, and what Nadia said, she found really funny about that was, and she's absolutely right, is getting in an airplane and flying around the world feels kind of hippie.
Yeah.
Like, he did the same thing, just in a plane. That doesn't make it any better or worse.
Well,
that's a really interesting observation.
They sort of imply, though, that he was, and it's still the same, but in his head, the justification is the implication that he was doing it because everyone else was going and changing and living lives. So he was running away
looking
from
for that
his
same
fear
thing.
of change.
But in the end, what's interesting about the Andy character is essentially he was running away from his life. Because that's what's great about the end of the episode. At the start of the episode, he's all blaming Greg for not introducing his son and blaming Greg for not sort of keeping him updated or being part of the family. And now you want to know what Aunt Deb's up to. Do you know what I mean? But then towards the end of the episode, he's sort of saying like, "Well, I could have come back here. I could have found out you existed," to Stephen. And I think that's a really interesting shift for the character.
Yeah, and is true, and a good point.
Well, I think with all these situations, look, it takes two people to drift. I mean, this happened to me before, where there's people I haven't spoken to in years and years, and then I do, and they're like, "Whoa, where have you been or whatever. And it's just like, well, yeah, where have you been? Like both people have to not take action for that to work. Do you know what I mean?
It's a real pet peeve of mine, because I got a lot of, like, this is just a personal gripe at me moaning, but I got a lot of, I know a few people like that are like, well, that will just automatically blame the other person for the drifting, and it's like, it takes two to tango. If you can show me a message thread where you've said about meeting up and I've ignored you, fine, but it's probably pretty even. And yeah, that's a pet peeve of mine as well, Daniel.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's what Andy's sort of guilty of in the early part of this episode. I think he's putting all the weight for the drifting and the separating of their family on Greg and Stephen. Well, not on Stephen as such, but on Greg, basically. He's like, you've got this whole life, and I had no idea about it. I didn't know you had a kid. I didn't know any of this stuff. And like, how are you, And what I think's really good, what's really good about this episode is that it's not clear cut when he changes as well. We haven't really complimented this yet, but basically you see him go through stages of acceptance in this episode. And then every time he's starting to come around, something else happens, and it's like, oh no, he's going back the other way now because something's bothered him. And it's like, it's not the usual television approach of he thinks one thing, something happens, and now he thinks the other thing, and that's his character arc complete. Andy goes a bit back and forth in this episode with whether he's on board with this.
Which is nice.
He's very not on board. Then this meal seems like a nice idea, but then they use his plane and he's not on board again. And then they sit around and he is on board. And then they're all making all these in-jokes and he's not on board. Like it's really back and forth. And I think that's actually surprisingly human and realistic, and it shows that these issues are often multifaceted, and it's not as simple as there's one thing you can say that will make that person come round. No, it's going to take multiple stages. There's multiple things that have got to be considered when you're convincing someone that something is one way or the other. When you've got someone who thinks a certain way, changing their mind is more complex. And I think this episode again uses its 22 minutes perfectly to give Andy a really back and forth sort of swing until he finally does sort of come round to it and go, you know what? No, this is the life you've got, and I'm partly responsible for the fact that I don't know what it is. It's almost him saying it's almost my fault I don't understand all those weird in jokes you guys are making at the table.
And because Andy's had a chance to learn that, he needs to get in touch with my friend Taylor and tell him to get off my back. Okay? Why don't you text about meeting up with me? No, I'm joking. Well, I'm not joking, but that's a fake name I've given.
That's amazing.
Yeah. No, I love that, Jenny. Like you say, that's the execution of the 22 minutes. So here's the thing: when we've complimented, and it's weird because we've complimented both 22-minute episodes. I'd still argue, as you said earlier, that Bismuth could just be split in two and be a two-parter. But I still don't feel like the show should be 22 minutes. And not just because it would make doing this podcast longer. But I like it occasionally. It makes it feel like...
I think in the Bismuth episode, we both said it could have... I'm not actually... I think we might have even said we're not sure where you'd split it. But over time... I think I've sort of gone, oh no, you could split it. You could split it at the, you could write it so your midpoint is Bismuth is part of the team. But the counter argument to that is if your midpoint is Bismuth is part of the team and you cut it there, then what you'd want to do then in that version of events is you do a couple of episodes where they go on adventures with Bismuth before you drop the other shoe.
But I think the what's the other thing with that one is though it was meant to be the 100th episode and it feels a bit special. It's seeped in Gem history, whereas this one feels almost like a Netflix, FX, HBO style. Well, the episode needed to be longer, so we made it longer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fascinating,
and I think what's interesting, what I like about it, and it looks like in real terms we're about to. By the time this episode goes out, it might already be out there, but it looks like we're about to potentially get another double coming up. So far, only one sort of title has been given to it. It might turn out to be two separate episodes that have a cliffhanger of some sort. We don't know because Cartoon Network have yet again decided to keep us in the dark. But
didn't you say they recent?
Go on.
recently did an hour episode or something weird like that, or
sort of, yeah. So
they
did an event called Wanted that they promoted as like a one night hour long event, and it was 4 episodes, but they were 4 episodes.
Right. Okay.
It's hard to explain, but I believe it was the episodes starting with Stuck Together. And ending with an episode which is title I won't reveal, actually, because I think that's potentially a spoiler. But the 4 episodes following, including and following Stuck Together, were put out as an episode with the title Wanted, basically. And some people consider that to be sort of a bomb, and I don't see it that way. They were sort of all dropped at once, which I guess sort of goes that way. But yeah, so we're actually only like 15, 20 episodes from that, which is crazy when you think about it, because
it's nuts.
We're starting to get to the point now where I was when we started recording this podcast, Chris. In fact, we are a bomb away from that, really.
That's nuts.
Because oh my god, that next bomb originally aired the month we started recording this. So you're nearly caught up to where I was when we started.
That's nuts. And it's such a shame, though, that I'm that close, because that still shouldn't make us that close to catching up, but that's a testament to the hiatus and how little episodes have come out in the time we've been doing this.
Yeah, because we've been doing this for over a year, and there's only like a handful of episodes, following that, so it's interesting. Yeah, actually, that's true as well. We've been doing it for more than a year now. We actually started in February, and then recorded a bunch slowly before we started releasing them. So where are we now? We're April. So, but anyway, so I think it's. I think what I like about the 22-minute thing here is it feels like they did bismuth, and went, okay, we know it can work. We tested the water. We dipped our toe in. We know it can work now. And I think that the show, generally speaking, starts to feel more confident doing longer form storytelling going forward, and not necessarily in this format. This format sort of isn't really used again, even though there's a chance we might be getting an episode like that very soon, because they just released, for those paying attention, they just did 4 episodes, starting with Your Mother and Mine, and those were released as individual episodes, but there's a potential sort of 2-parter coming up that is being advertised as, I can't even say what that's called, just because that might be a potential spoiler. Yeah, but there is a title out there on the advertisement, but it could be like that Wanted one, where it was 4 episodes, but the network was sort of calling it the Wanted event. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, but we're potentially a few episodes away from another 2-parter. But since this one, I'll tell you now, Chris, there aren't any other 20-minute episodes like this. But the show does start to play with more long-form storytelling, episodes that more confidently lead directly into the next. Yeah, you get these little batches of them that are coming up, and it's really cool. In fact,
yeah, I'm excited. It feels like
I think the next bomb kind of does that. I think the next bomb, honestly, for all 5 episodes, really do feel like it's one like crazy hour and a bit long episode.
It feels a bit like, oddly, considering we've done 2 podcasts on these shows, it feels a bit like Fringe. Like, you know how Fringe just kind of did less of the episode of the week, and more sort of episodes of the week that linked together and told one story. Feels like that.
Yeah, and I think it's thanks to episodes like Bismuth and this one that the writers felt confident enough to start doing that stuff. Because I don't think they would have necessarily otherwise.
Do we see Andy again? Ooh.
Well, that's not something I'm going to spoil. Would you like to see Andy again? And if that's 2. I have 2 questions for you. Would you like to see Andy again, and in what context? And then it was sort of how long of a gap do you think you need before you bring him back, or do you bring him back next week?
I wouldn't mind a fair bit of a gap before seeing Andy again. I don't know. I tell you what. I want to see Andy again, but I don't want to see Andy just there. So therefore, you have to do a story with Andy, and I'd want it to be a story that I wouldn't want it to be this story again. So maybe you have Andy fall in love with a gem. Maybe, we've seen every gem. But I did think, actually,
that's actually a really neat idea.
Well, I did think that you could have. I just had this, and I didn't. I'm sure it wasn't going that way, but I did suddenly think, oh, what if like what won Andy over was like he really liked a fusion. Like, so the idea of him, like, because he's seen all the gems, but maybe he like oddly falls for a fusion or something, or I don't know. So I want a story with Andy.
Yeah.
If he's fallen in love with a fusion, I haven't read that. That's just something I thought of.
I like the idea now that we've so many times they've said your predictions have come true. Now you're saying stuff and going, it's probably true, isn't it?
No, I'm not cocky. Like, I'm not like, well, that's bound to be true. But yeah, I just had this vision of people just being like, well, there's no way he's guessed that. But that is a guess. I'd love it if that happened, but happened like after this airs, and people would be like, oh, well, yeah, no.
How did you feel to the very massive reveal in this episode that Stephen's actual surname should be DeMeo?
I was kind of like, oh, and then I was like, oh, I suppose like I buy that Greg's Italian. I don't know why he's not got a particularly Italian look, but I sort of
would you consider DeMeo to be a specifically Italian name?
Well, no, but he references being Italian. He makes a lot of references to being Italian, doesn't he? Other than the name.
Does he? Oh, okay. Maybe I didn't.
I'm sure he does. Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought he did. I thought he.
Yeah, I wouldn't rule it out. And he's got a very sort of like New York Italian vibe, though, hasn't he? If he has.
Yeah. I'm sure. Like I said, I'm sure that comes from somewhere. So yeah, what did I think of that? It makes sense. Like, it made me laugh when Steven's like, DeMeo's so much cooler than Universe, because it's like, is it?
No, it definitely isn't.
I thought it was. You know what? The whole notion of exploring Greg's family is another great example of the show doing something, and me going, oh, that's brilliant and logical and interesting. But I never would have thought of that, or I hadn't thought of that. Which is awesome. That's the best kind of the stories that feel like a surprise yet expected are brilliant.
Well, yeah, it's also cool because they kind of hinted at it previously. Because in the Marble Madness episode, Connie's mum, Miss Maheshwaran, whose Dr. Maheshwaran, whose first name I cannot remember off the top of my head, says she doesn't think that Universe is Stephen's real name. So they actually like they hint at that. She's like, that can't be his real name. So it's been hinted at much earlier than even this episode sort of does the final thing, and it's kind of cool that they sort of like they must have known that for some time, and I think that's a really neat reveal. Yeah,
it's awesome. Like, there's a lot when because I think when it started. I don't know why I said that weird. When it started and Pumpkin was created, I thought the sentence, I guess enjoyment of this episode will depend on how cute you find Pumpkin. I found Pumpkin cute enough. I was a bit meh. So for it to then spin, like the minute he then crashes and it's like, oh no, it's about this dude and then he's related to Greg and you're like, oh, he's related to Greg. Like, it unfolds beautifully and
it really does.
And really is a really interesting, decent subject for an episode. And they explore so many other things. I think it's interesting, the notion, what you were saying earlier about, or on the last episode probably by this point, about every character getting a moment to shine. Like, I'm not sure... Amethyst has that great joke where it reveals that she's been swallowing bottles of oil and then she, like, breathes fire. And Pearl has some nice moments. The main gems, Garnet, Pearl, Amethyst, I think they get moments and maybe less moments than the others. But I did find it strange. There's so many shots with all of them, and that's beautiful.
Yeah, and it did sort of slant towards Peridot and Lapis, but I think that's kind of because
it's fine.
It's their barn and their way of life that's being defended.
Yeah.
So I think it's only right to focus on them a little more. But what did you think to the moment when they're sort of when Andy sort of presumes that he's with Garnet, quite awkwardly, sort of being like, which do you push? And I love as well. There's the continuation of that joke that Greg just likes very large women.
I just love it when he's like, I mean, I'm not saying you're big. It's because you're tall and you know, I'm not saying I love that because it was such like non. It was such non-studio third camera comedy. Like what's the term? I'm blanking.
Multicam.
When a comedy isn't in front of an audience. Multicam. It was so multicam sitcom style of humor. And I love it when Steven Universe drops some of that in.
Yeah, I think it's like that sort of weird, awkward, almost improvised vibe. You know, that sort of Rick and Morty like sort of loose dialogue feel where it feels like maybe the actors riffed for a second and they kept it. You know, I really like that sort of style of Rick and Morty because it feels more natural,
same.
And it can also make the joke, especially if the joke is based in a little bit of awkwardness. You know, I think giving them sort of like the legit sort of stutters and starts and but if you just you know, like anything like that kind of is always inherently makes an awkward moment like that kind of funnier. But I also think it makes a perfect amount of sense that like you would assume that one of these women in front of him would be the mother. You know, he's just been introduced to Greg and his kid, and there's a bunch of like these. Is any? Yeah, but I love that the boldness of is it this one? Is it this one? Like you wouldn't guess, Andy. What are you doing? Like if I met someone and I made the if I drew the line and assumed that one of the women in the vicinity was that person's wife, I wouldn't be like, is it this one? Is it this one? I wouldn't guess, Andy. What are you doing, mate? Bow out. That could only end badly. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
That's total guesswork. I also.
Do you think?
Go on.
There you go.
No, because I was going to move us on, but you've got a point relating to what I was just saying.
No, relating to Andy, because when he first appeared, I was like, is it Greg's brother? So, what do you think of the cousin decision? Because you kind of. I think it's a good way of doing the family, extended, larger family storyline without making it so specific. And they kind of he's painted as an uncle, so you have the same effect, maybe with less questions.
Yeah, I think 100%. You've hit the nail on the head. It's to create a sort of brother character without actually doing the brother thing. Because if you do the brother thing, then the question is, well, wait a minute. It's one thing for a cousin to not see each other for a while. Brothers?
Yeah.
Really? That does it seems way it would seem way less believable if Andy was his brother, because you would see your brother more often. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that it's kind of like the perfect balance of the two. But that then suggests that Greg is an only child, because presumably it's never really occurred to me to think about it, but we've never met any other of Greg's family.
Yeah,
so.
And you feel like if he wasn't, it would have come up here.
Precisely, yeah. They talk about Deb a lot, so they presumably would have asked more about each other's more. So yeah, this kind of is the episode where you think like if we got through this and they weren't referenced, then they probably don't exist. So yeah, but I also really liked the way that the gems sort of work together in this episode. I thought for a very common cause, like that. Like I like that Garnet, Pearl, and Amethyst all showed up to defend Peridot and Lapis's right to stay in that barn and help convince Andy. And I love as well that that's the solution. For a minute, it looks like it's going to be like a fight, like a very combative thing. And Steven steps in and is like, no, let's impress him. Let's show him what our family is like. And maybe he'll be generous enough to let us keep the barn. And I think that's very Steven, very this show. And I think that's a really, in a weird way, a much more entertaining episode out of it, because if you'd have made it more combative, I don't think it could have been as entertaining. You could do a joke about it maybe going to some sort of like court, or it could have been an actual fight of some sort where he goes and brings in some old army buddies or something like that. Do you know what I mean? You could have done a bunch of things where it was more combative, more action packed maybe, but this feels so much more Steven Universe to do it in this sort of like this way where Steven is sort of going, no, we got to convince him. Let's not be in any way aggressive about this. Let's show him that
also,
the way we live is been really good for us, and maybe he'll be kind enough to let us use it.
Very this show, I think, for a show that started with almost like, and maybe I'm wrong, and correct me if I am, but it almost felt like at the beginning it was going to be Monster of the Week. To do an episode of a show which is essentially about aliens fighting monsters, or corrupted versions of the aliens, and protecting the Earth and all of that stuff, to do an episode where the jeopardy is a family falling out if a dinner doesn't go well, that's amazing. Like that's so cool.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And I want to, while we're on the subject of just this show being this show again with the fucking animation, that the moment when it's sort of it's sunset and Lapis takes Steven up to follow Andy in his plane is so beautifully animated. The colors, the clouds, the way the light cascades, the way that Steven's sort of feet touch the water as she lowers him. And it creates that weird sort of like, oh, come on, it's just fucking beautifully shot. It's just beautifully drawn. It's incredible. It's a really, really great use of this show's animation style. I really like that element of it. Just because while we're complimenting the show, did you have any notes, any other bits you loved?
Yeah, well, I obviously just seeing the gems work together, like particularly when they were harvesting the crops, I thought that was just really neat. Seeing like Garnet use her powers to like make the carrots pop up and like Lapis flying around catching them, like something about just seeing them that unified, I thought was really neat. Because again, particularly Lapis, her involvement has been very intentionally. Like she's always stepped back. No, I'm not interested. No, I'm not helping out. You want to come on this mission to the other kindergarten with us? No, you know what I mean. Like she's always been like outside of it. So just seeing her slowly get more involved, even in moments like this, and I know this made the most sense for her to be involved in because it was protecting her way of life again. But yeah, I think it's just such a cool way to do it. Not even that. You couldn't make Lapis look like a loner in this. You had to make everyone else feel like a unified family for Andy's upset at being the one out on the cake to work. So I think it'll be interesting what they do with Lapis, the next time we see her, because I'd be fascinated or interested to know whether she was such a part of the family for the sake of the plot of this episode, or whether that's a character growth thing. That's what you're basically, what did you think towards the way of because obviously in this world there aren't really, they don't have all the same holidays we do, because there's a reference Andy sort of says, what is this, like some sort of candy giving out holiday, hinting that Halloween in itself doesn't really exist in this world, making Steven's pumpkin carving even more horrific when you think about it. And obviously it doesn't seem they have Thanksgiving either, but there's a sort of equivalent to it here. Because they're all sat around the table basically thanking each other for the fact that they all came together and the meal ended up happening. How did you? Because I really liked that, because it is sort of like an alternate history version of America, so it makes sense that they wouldn't have Thanksgiving or Halloween for X, Y, and Z reasons. Like the culture is clearly different, because when they go away and come back with all the human holidays or events that they could think of, they think of things like weddings and birthdays and funerals. They don't come back with like Halloween stuff or Christmas stuff or anything like that, suggesting those holidays might not exist. So how do you think about sort of approximating them and referencing them in a sort of more subtle way, rather than actually saying that this world has those holidays?
It wasn't something I noticed, I'll be honest. It wasn't. I just sort of, I got the Thanksgiving vibes. I got the Halloween vibes. It wouldn't have surprised me to find out this episode had aired around Thanksgiving.
It absolutely did. It aired on November the 17th, 2016. Thanksgiving was on the 24th of November, about a week later.
Yeah, so that doesn't surprise me at all. The notion of the alternative history thing wasn't something I'd picked up, but I really like that. I think we've complimented this show for that before, that they have a history, they have an Earth that has been affected by events, as opposed to the alternative, which is the reference we always use, but the bright way of doing it, where you have a world with a completely different history, yet in a world where, or is it orcs? It is orcs, isn't it? In a world where orcs actually exist, somehow Shrek was made still, and made with exactly the same plot and references. Mind-blowing. What is happening there? So for everything Bright did wrong, Steven Universe does right.
Yeah, we've made that reference before, but it's absolutely true.
So true.
We've hit on a lot of the stuff in the sort of triv anyway, but
I also like that they revealed this week, obviously, that Rose and Greg were never formally married, which actually makes a lot of sense because, of course, in Last One Out of Beach City, Pearl sort of suggested that they're not legal citizens, so Rose and Greg wouldn't have been able to get married, strictly speaking.
Yeah.
And it is technically true to describe them as illegal aliens. They're not registered as inhabitants of the country. They're not, they don't have...
Yeah,
they don't have any sort of rights or status in an official sense. They're not citizens, as it were. So I thought that was really interesting as well.
Yeah, I agree completely. I thought that was quite neat.
Yeah, getting to the last few bits of trivia I do actually have that we haven't already discussed because we've sort of hit on everything this week, which is interesting. There wasn't that much, to be honest with you, but the stuff that there is, we've got. The name DeMeo for Greg's birth name seems to have been borrowed from Nick DeMeo, who is an animation director for the show, as well as this particular episode.
Cool.
But I suspect he's directed on many, many episodes, and it was sort of done in honor of him. In some way, I can't imagine he chose that himself. I think that was probably the creative, the rest of the creative team sort of getting his name in there somewhere. I think that's kind of neat.
Yeah, definitely. That's very neat.
Let's have a look. There's some animation gaffes, apparently. When Greg explains that the gems are like his family, Amethyst apparently disappears from Peridot's side and then reappears next to Garnet in the next shot. So there's some sort of weird animation gaff there. There's also apparently, right before Amethyst burps fire, if you freeze frame it, Greg is apparently animated for a few frames with two mouths, one a smile, one neutral. That's some sort of weird animation gaff that appears. So there you go. There's a continuing reference, obviously, for that Peridot likes the little green men version of aliens. That traditional design of an alien. She's had boxes with those on before. If you remember, she wanted to win one of those in the Two Shots to Ride episode. And in this one, she's created another piece of meat morp, I guess, that's an alien.
That's what I assumed it was. Yeah.
Yeah,
I assumed it was that.
Yeah, and it's apparently a bit of a tongue-in-cheek reference to the god of nature, Cernunnos, who I don't know of, but is a sort of depicted as like a mask face with antlers. There's apparently potentially a little reference to that. I'm not sure exactly how clear that reference is, but let's have a look. Yeah, we talked about that. We talked about that. Yeah, obviously, this is a sort of evaluation of Steven's powers that we've already seen in Watermelon Steven. Yeah, we know about that too. I think we've hit everything except for, can we go back to cars exist as a subsection of this podcast, Chris?
Right.
Although this week we're doing a special edition of Cars Exist called Planes Exist. And Andy's...
It's a real plane, let me guess.
Yeah, I mean, Andy's plane resembles the 1916 Bristol F2 fighter biplane, which, again, pretty cool.
That is cool. That is a really cool level of detail.
Yeah, I like that the show constantly seems to be doing that, and I think that's I'm on board.
I think I think that's cool because you could get sarcastic about it and be like, the pizza resembles a pepperoni pizza, but I think that it is actually, you could design a car to just look generically like a car, or you could design a plane to just look like a plane.
Yeah, you could literally there are generic shapes that you just go, that's a car. You wouldn't think about it.
Yeah.
But to actually model it off an existing one to give it that little bit more sort of real world design vibe, I think it's really neat. And I think the same with the plane.
Absolutely.
One thing I wanted to talk about, actually, and I forgot to sort of hit on, is Peridot still has that lack of sentimentality towards things that she sometimes does when she's not thinking. So, like, that plane that they obviously was clearly in the barn when they got there, and they've pulled apart to use for various bits and bobs that, Andy discovers they've done that, and he gets kind of upset. She's just like, yeah, but look what we've made it into. I think that's a really neat scaled down echo of Peridot's opinion on, like, do you remember when it could have been great when she sees the plan for the Earth colony? So it's like this lump of rock in space as far as she's concerned. Forget the inhabitants for a second. And she's sort of like, look how cool this is. You're going to turn this useless lump of rock into this gem harvesting machine. and here we are, like, you know, and it could have been great. And then here it's like, you know, there's this useless plane, and we turned it into this cooker. And Andy's like trying to explain, no, that plane was the first plane I learned to fly, and it has value beyond the practical. And I like that it's sort of like a scaled down, and I think it's a nice version of the scaled down sort of equivalent for that for Peridot. I thought that was kind of a neat, like, sort of not her growth as such, but like I guess her growth. I mean, that's how else would you describe it? Like, it's like Peridot has sort of she's not quite there yet, but you can tell she's starting to see it. Like, she doesn't debate with him when he says that. She sort of feels bad about it, and that's like progress in itself.
Yeah, and they give her the sentimental speech about him and the thank you earnest speech about him at the end, which is quite a nice use of her character for that reason, showing that progress. And
I kind of like to think that beyond this episode, whether you see Andy or this again, when I watched this, I was like, I like to assume that from now on, every year, they get together and they do this.
Oh, that's a nice notion, yeah.
I like the idea that becomes a tradition for them, and not just because of Andy.
Maybe next year, Connie's invited.
Yeah, fucking hell. Poor Connie, eh? Left out on the sidelines. Imagine that when she comes.
She's. You know why? You know what? Actually, Dan. You know what? Based on the phone call in Onion Gang, I'm betting Connie was invited, but Connie was all, "Oh, is it a mission? No, it's not a mission. We're just having dinner. Oh, well, no. Well, okay. Well, the mission is family." She's just like, "Oh, fuck it. Unless I can use my sword, I'm out." You can cut up the veg with the sword. No, Stephen. I've got kids to beat up in school. Back off. So I reckon Connie probably was invited. She didn't want to
go. Well, yeah, that could be it. That makes a certain amount of sense. What did you think because I got a bit like, did you notice it had like a bit weirdly sort of like, it had a vegetarian message, but then clearly in full view at the end on the table was a big old chicken or turkey.
Yeah, which almost made it. I was like, well, guys, you've not mentioned meat throughout. I suppose you've got the oven, but like, it just felt a bit like, okay, well, now we're really pushing. It felt like it was there at the end to push the Thanksgiving notion.
Yeah, I thought that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because like they literally have a line where he's like, "What is this all veg? I should have known with you, you hippy dippy types." And Steven's like, "Vegetables are great," or whatever. He says some line about how they're brilliant, and then and you get the impression the meal is a meal of vegetables, which is fine and like no problem. Okay, cool. You want to push a sort of pro stuff from the earth message. I think that's a good thing. It's nice to give kids that sort of idea early on.
I mean, and they to be fair, they've done pizza, they've done cheeseburgers. Like, it's cool. Like, give us the vegetable angle. Like,
yeah,
cool.
Absolutely. Because even those kids who just need to, quite frankly, eat more vegetables, because like let them see that Stephen is quite happy to eat vegetables as well as pizzas and burgers. That's great. Or you could look at it from the other side and think that maybe you're implanting some sort of more vegetarian or vegan ideals in children sort of at an earlier age, and that's also a good thing. The meat industry is a problem. I'm a part of it, I accept, but yeah, I think it's nice. I think it's nice that you sort of
guys, Dan's not saying that he's not eating bacon and chicken all the damn time. Like, he's just saying that he's watched some documentaries and we acknowledge that they are right. It's just hard to quit.
It really is. It's very difficult. Bacon tastes so yummy. Even if I know it's coming.
Such a shit excuse. Oh, well,
we're the worst, Chris. We're the worst. No, I acknowledge that vegetarianism is the way to go, probably, and I think that's how it's going to go. I think that documentary, the Simon Amstel one, I think that's almost entirely what's going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I think that people will look back on meat eating insanely negatively. I think that will eventually, and not even like 50. I think it will take a long time, but I think eventually, that will happen. And I think, but in general, like, did you see the statistic? This is a weird angle, but did you see the statistic that if more people refused the free prescription paracetamol and paid the 20p that the shops charge you for paracetamol, it would save the NHS millions. Like,
Yeah.
it would put so much money back in. Like, it's even little things like that. And I bring that up because it's very related to that. Like, a lot of people don't realise that if we ate less meat, that would actually help the environment because there'd be less farms and all that kind of stuff.
Well,
Or
that's the
less,
problem, is that the demand for meat is so insane that we've sort of created the situation where the animals are getting mistreated because a farm that has all the animals sort of roaming about and, they have a nice little life, and then, that whole cycle from many years ago, the entropy is that meat is so mass produced now that the only way for a farm to actually keep up with that demand is to basically mistreat the animals and grow them in the way they're doing. I think if less meat is consumed, then obviously there's less pressure on the farming industry and less requirement for the farming industry to do those crazy techniques they're doing to make chickens fatter, and all that cruelty would not exist, but there'd be a lot less reason for it to exist, basically. So yeah. Anyway, I think that's off. There's off topic and there's that.
Yeah, I will say though, like it's funny because like I didn't know if you had any other trivia or anything, but I genuinely I joked at the beginning, but part of me did watch this episode and then think, is there that much to say? So I like the fact that we have comfortably, not forcefully filled 2 episodes worth of conversation.
Yeah, well, I think when it is 22 minutes long, there is double the content, so there is double the moments to talk about. Like, because what was the other thing? There was one other moment I wanted to ask you about, and it slipped my mind. Oh no, that's a shame.
Was it to do with the chicken? That's what we were just talking about.
The chicken, and then there was 2 left the things I thought of.
I had. Did you not think? I mean, come on, Stephen. Treat your shield a bit better than using it as a fucking pan.
Oh yeah.
It's like I was a bit like, come on now.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the other thing I really liked, and that's the other thing I want to mention. Not a big point. It won't lead to a massive conversation, but I did love that they're continuing to sort of reassert that clearly Peridot's role in gem society was a kindergartner.
Yeah.
And she ran the kindergartens, and like this notion that she liked to grow things out of the ground, and all right, vegetables aren't quite the same as gems because they don't, there's the pitter patter of gem feet or whatever she said. But I just liked the idea that like that's the reason she wanted to grow stuff, because obviously gems don't eat, so there's no actual benefit to her for farming because she doesn't have any use for corn. But like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I really liked that idea. I thought that was really sweet, and I thought it was nice that Peridot. No, she is Peridot. Well, it's nice that Lapis helped Peridot.
She could have a
water
whole business like feeding the town with vegetables.
Oh my god, she could up a little Peridot veggie stand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you could do a plot where like she's selling vegetables and then they accidentally do some gem shit to the vegetables and they realise that everyone's eating it or something. Like you could do a fun plot, I think, with Peridot and Lapis growing a farm. Like maybe the pressures of the business put a strain on their relationship, whatever kind of relationship that may be.
Yeah, I'm on board. I would love that.
That's amazing.
There you
so
go.
yeah, there we go. I did think as well, like, why going back to the using the shield as the pan. He did it subtly, but surely Andy was a little bit like, did my nephew just produce a shield out of nowhere?
Yeah, there's always that weird subtle thing in Steven Universe where you just think like people are clearly used to weird shit happening because often the running
Andy's
joke...
not.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah,
that's like on the I love. I don't know if I love or like separate tangent. I'd be interested to get your opinion, although you're ahead of me. I love it when you can't work out whether you've not picked it up, whether you're interpreting it wrong, or whether a show's not done it. So, like in this case, how much did Greg fill him in on everything? Because there's that line where he's like, they're an alien, but he clearly then references "get out of my country," so he's misinterpreted that badly. So did Greg off camera go, no, by the way, legit aliens, like from space, like, or is Andy just a bit confused and not really asking questions? And it's similar to The Good Doctor, which is a show I'd very much recommend if no one's watching it. There's the lead character is autistic, and Jess turned to me at the end of an episode yesterday and was like, "Does the neighbour know he's autistic?" And I was like, I think she must have worked that out or must know that. But they've not strictly had the moment where the neighbour references, so you don't know whether the neighbour does know that or whether the neighbour is and that's fascinating. Does that get dealt with in a later episode of The Good Doctor, Dan?
I assumed she knew the whole time.
That's what I said to Jess. I was like, that's what I said to Jess. I was like, I'm pretty sure she knows, and Jess did as well, but she just wasn't too sure.
Yeah. It's never directly.
I love it when a show does that.
It's certainly at first not directly referenced. I always find that every week they do in that show, The Good Doctor. For those who don't watch it, so the Doctor is autistic, and obviously he's a bit of a savant, so he's an absolute genius. But he's also very pragmatic, so he often says really inappropriate things. So he'll just be like, "You're going to die," and they'll be like, "What?" And he's like, "Yes." Like he's like worked out that basically like, but he won't. There's no tactful nature because of his autism. And I think that they do that really well. But what I love is every week they have to do that moment where he says something inappropriate, and then walks out the room, and the other doctor's like, "Yeah, he's autistic. Bear with him." Like they have to sort of have that moment almost every week with the patients.
Yeah, I don't think they do. They could do that more, though. I think they do a good. I don't think they do that too much. What's crazy about that show is I believe it's got better viewings than like this is. I think it's one of the highest rated shows. So
it's been doing really well, and wait till you see the finale. Like Chris is behind on it, but like the finale is stunning.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm excited. So there we go. That was a 2-part Gem Harvest special. Well, not a special, I suppose, because we've divided it up into 2 regular episodes. But for us, it was special. For us, it was an hour and a half of recording.
Yeah, about an hour and a half. Yeah. Look at that. Wow.
Yeah. But that was a good. Yeah, that was a good 5-10 minutes of chatter beforehand as well.
Well, it was 6, if you remember rightly, Chris. There's exactly 6.
No, I mean before we even start recording, mate.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about Hamilton yet, Chris.
Yeah, I know. Dan went to see Hamilton.
I finally saw Hamilton after winding Chris up about it for months. And you know what? We're still using the app to try and get to see it again, second time.
That good, huh?
That's so good.
I struggle to believe that you weren't rapping along with it. But if you say you weren't...
No, I wasn't audibly rapping along, Chris, because I respect the theatre too much, but in my head I was definitely rapping along. And Nadia says at one point she saw me mouthing along.
Yeah. But there it's surely, like... really, so people aren't... It's not one of those sort of people singing things like the Lion King.
It's not, but everyone there arrived in Hamilton merchandise, so everyone there knew the show back to front. And then when we left, there was a crowd of people gathered around, and they were clearly some of the actors had come straight out to sign things. We had no intention of waiting around to meet any of the cast because we were like, there's another, because we saw the matinee. There was another show in like 2 hours. We were like, they're going to stay in there. They're not going to come out. You wouldn't come out. You just stick around, in your dressing room, whatever. And have maybe get someone to fetch some lunch for you or whatever. But they came out and signed stuff immediately, like straight away.
Oh, wow.
So we were leaving and we passed them, but they were there. So we went over and we got a couple of the cast to sign some stuff for us. And they were all super nice and really amenable. But like the crowd waiting for the cast, like there was one girl they were like, they knew her. She'd been like 5 times or something. And it was just like, yeah, like the fandom around Hamilton as a show is something else. Like someone went in a custom-made shirt that said "It's a Hamilton thing." You wouldn't get it. That was quite funny. And like just there's a clearly like the sort of, and it's amazing because everyone is so in awe of the show. They're really respectful. So it's amazing because I've never been to a show where there's huge applause breaks mid-act. But certain songs would finish, and it'd be just huge rounds of like, standing ovations essentially. And then the actors would have to pause and wait and hold it for a second while the clapping died down before they started the next. That was actually really cool. So they've obviously that's not my show. That's not my particular audience. That's the audience. So yeah, it's certainly something I'm going to hopefully go see again. We're going to keep applying to the Hamilton lottery until we win more tickets and go and see it a second time. Nadia loved it also. She wants to go back and see it again. So that's
awesome.
Saying something. It's really good.
I'm not adverse to seeing it. I'm not anti Hamilton. You just got so obsessed with it.
That you by default started rejecting it.
I think it was pain for Nadia. Like, if I was feeling it, if I was feeling how obsessed you were getting, like, and admittedly, like, we chat basically every day, but still, like, if I was feeling it, it must be just nuts for Nadia.
Yeah, to be fair though, she made it very clear she didn't want spoilers because she was seeing it, so I was really careful with what I was saying around her. But yeah, she got kind of fed up with it. So she probably had a negative connotation towards it before we even got there. I think it
that's
turned her
the crazy
around.
thing as well. Getting so obsessed with it without even seeing it, like, 'cause presumably you'd have had to have read synopsis and heard the soundtrack, or maybe
there's no
in between. I don't know.
No, there's no dialogue in between. It's all songs. The whole thing is done in song, top to bottom.
Right, okay. So
when you hear the
will
soundtrack,
give you the story.
The soundtrack gives you the story in full. The only downside is you can't always tell who's talking when you do the soundtrack. You can for the main voices because you learn those voices pretty quickly. But a lot of the tertiary characters, it takes a minute to sort of realize who's who, and then so and also there's an amazing amount of visual comedy that I didn't realize was in the show that obviously I got when I watched it.
Yeah.
You know, the second time. So yeah. So when I finally saw it, I was just like, oh, cool. So yeah, and I've got I'd been resisting watching and this is gonna sound dodgy, but I've got a bootleg copy of the original Broadway cast doing it that I never watched.
Right. Okay.
Because why would I do that? You know, I wouldn't. There'd be no point in me sort of watching because then I really needn't have gone. But I'm now gonna. I can actually watch that and see how the original Broadway cast did it and see if I can spot the differences, basically. So I'm kind of interested to see how that plays out when you do it that way. But yeah, it's.
I think the West End show I'm keen to see first is Cursed Child.
Did you get tickets for that? Christmas? Were you thinking?
No, we've never been able to. We've never been able to get them, and they are so expensive. And when you
because it's 2 plays.
Yeah, I know. No, I get it. Like, I get why it's expensive. Like, it's like we're trying very hard not to be those people that are like, oh, we're saving for a house. But when you're talking like 150 quid, and then you add going up their food, you know, you're looking at 300-400 quid in total. It is hard to justify. So yeah, but we would love to go.
Yeah,
we're going to Friends Fest.
We're going to Friends Fest.
Oh, nice! You're going in London, presumably.
Yes.
Yeah. So we are. It's not. We're not. You know. We're not those.
Friends Fest. Friends Fest this year have added Ross's apartment and the staircase, so you can walk up it and yell "Pivot."
I'm assuming that for those that don't know, it's basically the Friends sets recreated. My assumption is it's the sets recreated, and there's some props there that are genuine props.
Yeah, I guess
there's no way the sets are genuine. That would be recreations. But yeah, it's throughout England. It's touring England. So yeah, that should be good.
Yeah.
There you go.
You should get Cursed Child tickets, and you should get Hamilton tickets. Keep applying to the lottery. But then again, the problem is you'd struggle to drop everything because the lottery you're applying for the next day. So when you find out you've won, you're going the next day. So it's like planning that and stuff would be tricky for you.
Yeah, easier if you're in London like you are.
Yeah.
Cool. There you go. That's some Broadway talk and some Steven Universe talk for you.
Yeah, bit of both, Chris.
We'll be back. Is the next episode potentially the season 4 shorts?
No, so I've looked at it this morning. We kind of cocked up, Chris. So,
okay.
The season 4 shorts has already happened for those guys. For the listeners.
Oh, okay. We've just not recorded them yet.
Yeah, we've not recorded them yet, but they're going in between. Because at the end of what happened was I cocked up because at the end of the last episode, Onion Gang, I said, "We'll see you for Gem Harvest," and then afterwards I was like, "Oh, shit, it's actually the shorts." But then we had a perfect opportunity to record this today, where we could do both parts, do it as one, time wise, and I was like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm a little bit disappointed that's the way it's played out. So just because I would have liked to have done them in order, but yeah, the listeners have already heard the shorts, Chris, even though we're recording those later this week.
What a great episode that was!
It's fantastic, so good.
Yeah, really loved it.
We really reviewed those shorts well. I felt
we nailed it. I think.
Mm-hmm. And then the episode after that will be 3 Gems and a Baby. The episode after this.
Title.
The episodes after this is 3 Gems and a Baby.
Like I say, proper. That's a good title.
Yeah, and guess what comes after that, Chris?
3 gems and a toddler.
No, the next bomb.
Okay, cool.
So we've got the it's the bomb I referred to earlier, where I would argue like it's one crazy hour and a half, like it's all leads into each other. They still feel
nice.
weirdly distinct each episode, but it's sort of one story through those parts.
Cool.
So
There you go.
I'm really excited to watch those. So yeah, some exciting stuff ahead. And then of course there's another run of like single episodes. We're going to do another bonus episode. Actually, we should promote this here very quickly. We're going to do another bonus episode where we talk about fan content. So we're going to talk about. I'm going to show Chris Pearl's secret rap career. I'm going to show Chris other very sort of various famous fan made videos. So I'm going to show him. So this is basically Steven Universe and get his opinions on that. And this is basically just to make another bomb sync up with the Monday. But it'll be a fun thing to do either way, so I'm glad we're getting to do it. So if there's anything you guys think we should... any fan content that's really worth me showing to Chris, stick it in the comments. I'll have a look, or I might already know what it is, and then it'll help me build my list. Because at the moment, I can only think of those 2 things, but I know there's loads. So yeah, send me some stuff, and we'll do that, and we'll have a little episode where I show Chris some of the more interesting elements of the fan content, and then we can chat about those.
Cool. Sounds good. Exciting stuff coming up.
Yeah. So there you go. That's everything for this week. Then I've been Dan Doolan.
I've been Chris Billingham.
And we'll speak to you next time as we discuss 3 gems and a baby.